for our students. Our guidance anticipates that many of our districts are going to be providing a kind of a hybrid model. We call it a blended model of educational instruction, meaning that there will be some students who will be on campus for in-class instruction, and that there'll be some students who will continue to participate in distance learning. Many of our districts have surveyed their parents and have said that they would like to have the option for distance learning. And we're encouraging our districts to accommodate that need as they are able, because we believe that doing so actually is a strategy for addressing some of the challenges around spacing for our students. We are not saying or mandating that anyone be in distance learning. We're simply saying that districts should continue to accommodate what they can by the requests that are coming from parents for some distance learning. But we know that many of our students really need in-class instruction. Their parents may need to work. They may be the children of essential workers. And in many cases, these are children who just need to have contact again with peers and educators and with their support staff. And so the guidance lays out ways for educational programming to take place. It does partner in parallel with guidance released by the governor's office and the California Department of Public Health that speaks to more of the kind of health practices. The guidance is informed by CDPH, by the Center for Disease Control, by Cal OSHA. We're grateful to our partnership with the governor's office and to many state agencies. The guidance is informed by many educational leaders and stakeholders. I chaired a task force that we created and convened to bring in the voices of practitioners and educators from across the state, teachers, classified staff, students, parents, labor organizations, education administration associations, all working together to help provide a framework for schools to think about how we will reopen, because we want reopening to happen safely. Today, we provided a first opportunity to have a conversation with many of our partners in education. We hosted a web call for the 1,000 school districts in our state and many educational partners, where we could present the document, where we could go through examples of how the document works, where we could present some educational leaders who have actually been practicing social distancing measures and physical distancing measures while school has been open. We've given that opportunity so that we can give a look into how this might all go and what it might look like. But we know that this is just the beginning. Guidance is only as good as what's implemented. And so what we expect from this point forward is an ongoing conversation with educational leaders, the superintendents and teachers and principals and classified staff about how the guidance gets implemented. We expect that the guidance will be adjusted as we go, as we learn more information, but the guidance sets the bar high. Safety first, our top priority, based on the best information that we have from health experts. It's delivered in a time frame that gives schools time to plan, to measure their campuses on how they'll handle the challenges of 6 feet of spacing, to give thought to how they'll arrange their schedules, all at the same time that we're having conversation with our governor and the Department of Finance and our leaders in the state legislature about the kind of flexibility that we know our schools will need to have around instructional minutes, about the kinds of conversations that we know our schools will need to have around stable funding so they can support their staffing and operating, and so that they can acquire the personal protective equipment that they'll need to open with these physical distancing conditions in place. We're grateful to the governor who made an announcement on Friday that there'll be PPE provided by the state. We are continuing to work with the governor and the legislature on conversations about how that PPE can be made available to districts on an ongoing way to support them and going forward. And so that's, we'll stop there for now. I wanna turn you over to our Chief Deputy Superintendent, who will talk a little bit about how to use this guidance. As I mentioned, this was a broad and participatory process, but we've had many partners help to write sections of the guidance. A number of us at the Department of Education have literally written sections, but ultimately we are being guided by the leadership of our Chief Deputy, Dr. Stephanie Gregson, who has been a writer, I would say lead writer, has been our lead synthesizer, lead weaver, of pulling together the sections in a document that can be helpful for us as we work with our districts going forward. Dr. Gregson.
Thank you, Superintendent Thurman. As we know, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected us all and led us on a journey we never thought we would experience in this lifetime. The intent of this document is to be a guide for our local discussion in reopening schools, and it honors that there is no one-size-fits-all solution, as the context of each of our district varies and is unique. There are no mandates within this document. The purpose of this guidance is to assist LEAs in their planning in a way that allows for discussions on how to center all new designs on equity. Design from what your students need for academic and social success, remove the barriers to learning, increase transparency and community collaboration, and ensure that students, families, and staff are emotionally and physically safe. This guidance provides an opportunities for our LEAs to reflect on systems that may not have worked for every child, and an opportunity for all of us to lift up, educate, and care for every child we serve. In front of you right now is a picture of the table of contents. I don't expect you to be able to read it, but I do want to note that there is color coding for each of our sections within the document. What you'll find is with the blue icon with the house, the little schoolhouse, that is our front matter. So you'll see the table of contents, you'll see our superintendent's of public instruction, Tony Thurman's foreword, and the introduction to the document itself. Then you'll go into the health and safety. Within the health and safety section, you'll find a very comprehensive checklist for our districts to look at and consider as they are looking at how to use space, looking at transportation, looking at protective equipment for students and staff, and how to support students and staff to feel safe during this time. Within the instructional programs, you'll find instructional schedule models, different examples. We have 4 different examples that look on different cohorts, staggering start times. You'll find a looping model. You'll find an A and B model where some grade levels may be engaged in in-person instruction while others are engaged in distance learning. And then all students are engaged in distance learning on a Friday, and teachers are engaged in professional learning. So in the instructional programs section, you'll find those different types of models. You'll also find with the instructional programs, you'll find information around career technical education, expanded learning, English learners, special education, collaboration, and professional learning. And that's the time where we're looking at how do we focus our time for professional learning for our teachers and enhance collaboration. You'll find collaboration, information on collaboration and assessments, and also on social emotional learning. Next, within the professional relationships and learning, again, that goes to providing opportunities for our teachers to engage in enriching their relationships and their professional learning for themselves to better serve their students. Then it moves into the continuity of relationships and learning plans. Many of our school districts may be engaged in distance learning models, and the continuity of relationships and being physically distanced is critically important. And also understanding how to plan for the continuity of learning as we may hit a second wave of the pandemic. Here in California, we may experience wildfires or public safety power shutdowns. So it's just a guide for districts to look at to how to plan for that continuing of learning for any of those instances. Although we have social emotional learning and mental health and well-being embedded throughout the document, we also have a separate section on it that is modeled after our multi-tiered systems of support. Next, you'll engage in looking at communication and community engagement. We know during this time, being able to clearly communicate and articulate an LEA's plan is critical, and also engaging the communities during their planning time is a foundation to success. And so that is what that component is focused on. You'll look at early learning and care. We've learned a lot from our early learning and care child providers and examples of what they've already done. Then going into school services, looking at transportation, aligning the school transportation with the city bus services to ensure that all of our students get to school on time. You also find information around student meals. Within the appendices, You'll find resources that were embedded throughout the document, but you also find a frequently asked questions. So an FAQ, that's a quick reference for anybody who just has one particular question that they're looking for, they can go straight to the FAQ. So again, as our superintendent said, this document is a guidebook. It's a guide for planning discussion. There are no mandates in here because we have every district with its own local context and its own considerations. But really, the important work is around the implementation of their reopening plans. And so our team at CDE is here to support and be their thought partners as they move forward in their planning process and during their implementation, because we all know we're in this together and we're in this together to move forward together.
Thank you, Dr. Gregson. This is Daniel Thigpen, and I'm going to jump in here and open it up to questions from our members of the news media. So just a quick reminder, if you could please submit your questions in the Q&A box in Zoom, and please identify your news outlet. That would be helpful. Also, just want to make sure we've put in the chat function the link to the guidance document that was sent out in a media advisory earlier today. It's also posted online on our website at cde.ca.gov. So please take some time to go through that. And thank you, Dr. Gregson, for giving us an overview. I have two questions here from Marissa Perlman at CBS 13 in Sacramento. And the first question is, how does the state plan to address some of the gaps in learning as we transition to distance learning, and now that some of our kids may be behind? I'm going to ask Superintendent Tony Thurmond to take that question.
Well, thank you. As it relates to learning gaps, we have been, even before the pandemic, really focused heavily on how we address, gaps and achievement gaps. And the pandemic certainly has exacerbated those gaps. Many students without computers, not able to fully engage in distance learning. First of all, I do have to commend the way our schools and families moved into distance learning, and many of them really working hard. But we know that there were some bumps, and we've done some things to try and offset that. As you all know, I named a task force on closing our digital divide that has two goals: to immediately acquire technology for our students to help them respond to the needs for distance learning during the pandemic, but more importantly, for us to go for the moonshot, really, for us to say that we're going to close the digital divide once and for all. The work of this task force is as more important as ever. Even as schools reopen, we know that there'll be students who will remain in distance learning. We also know that for students who are in class instruction, they still will need to have more access to the internet. And so we've been able to make many commitments available for free Wi-Fi, for donated laptops. And we continue to work on those needs. We also know that when school reopens, teachers will do what they've always done. They will assess students where they enter. They will assess how well students are entering on grade level. They will assess what support is needed to help students that may not be entering on grade level. And so we know that those interventions will take place, that our teachers will do that. Dr. Gregson and I have been convening educators to have conversations about how we think about learning going forward, about how we focus on measurement of learning, on how we promote consistency of instruction if it occurs in a way that it involves distance learning and is different across sites. Dr. Gregson, would you like to add a bit to any of these concepts?
Sure, actually, absolutely, Superintendent Thurmond. As you said, teachers, when students come, it's a normal practice. When students enter their classroom, whatever that's virtually or in person, they assess to see where their students are at using different types of diagnostic assessments. And then they build out their instructional planning based on where students are at and grow them to their fullest potential. With the acceleration of learning, we are putting together guidance around acceleration of learning, so you can see that coming in the few weeks ahead that may focus on different types of bridge programs that students can engage in after school, or opportunities for teachers to grow within their school day. So different ways to approach the acceleration of learning, depending on where the student's at and where we want to move them to meet their fullest potential.
And then that second question from Marissa Perlman at CBS 13 in Sacramento is about what if there is another spike this fall? So how will safety be a priority if there were to be a spike this fall? And I'll start with Superintendent Thurman on this one.
We have to prepare for the likelihood that we could have to return to distance learning. I would say that that is a very intricate network of decision-making and how that happens. We literally have, it involves a number of people. It involves California's Department of Public Health. It involves California's Office of Emergency Services. It involves the California Department of Education as it relates to guidance on how to move into distance learning. But it also involves our county health officers who work on addressing conditions in their immediate areas. And as we saw after March 13th, when most of our schools moved to distance learning, county health officers often spoke to stay-at-home orders. And then ultimately, our governor declared a stay-at-home order for the entire state. And so should there, all of this relies, our success on reopening schools, just like reopening the parts of the state, relies on continual monitoring. As we've heard the governor talk about in his daily press conferences, the need for testing and contact tracing. California has achieved the highest rates of testing of any state with 60,000 tests a day. And so there's going to have to be ongoing monitoring to determine if there is any need to return to a kind of stay in place order and whether or not there'll be a need to have our students return to distance learning. We're taking the approach that as schools plan to reopen, that they should plan to open under the most safe conditions that we have information for. And that's why we are advising schools to open with students and staff wearing face coverings and maintaining 6 feet of distance at all times. And so for now, we plan between now and the opening, and then once schools open, we'll have to continue to monitor for ongoing safety needs and any further action that might be needed.
We have a question from Hal Eisner, Fox 11 News in Los Angeles. And he asks, I understand smaller classes will allow for more room for spacing. If many students go to school instead of distance learning, how will schools accomplish the goal of 6 feet per student? And also, how will staggered hours work?
I'm gonna ask Dr. Gregson to talk a little bit about the examples of different schedule models that we've been hearing from school districts. I'd like to take the first part of the question and speak to it. Right now is a critical time for school districts to really begin to analyze their campus, the footprints of their campus and campuses, and to make determinations about how many students can be safely taught in an in-campus and in-class instruction way. We are going to be having conversations starting today with county superintendents of education, who we will ask to gather information from all the individual school districts in their county about the ratio of in-class instruction to distance learning that they are planning to offer. We've heard directly from parents, we've heard directly from districts that many of their parents want distance learning. We know that many of our districts are surveying parents so they can understand the level of interest that exists so that they know what the footprint will be, the number of students that will likely be on campus. We won't really know until school opens, but we have to prepare based on what districts are creating in terms of their ratio of in-class instruction to distance learning. And we're actually encouraging districts that where they're being receiving requests to provide distance learning to accommodate that to the degree that they can, to accommodate the distance learning so that we can ensure that students have a smaller class sizes on campus. Now, we understand that not all families can participate in distance learning. And so again, nothing about this is a mandate for any amount of distance learning. We're simply saying if parents are asking for it, let's use that as a strategy. Let's use it as a planning tool to identify what the numbers of students we'll have on campus will be so that we can help to keep our campuses small. We know that's going to be important. We shared today in our webinar for our 1,000 school districts examples from educators who are mostly in the early education space who have used creatively every aspect of the campus to augment the campus footprint. They're using spaces like the cafeteria for classroom space that they can use to have tables spaced out over 6 feet of distance. They're using spaces like a gymnasium that can also be repurposed in the same way and still honoring 6 feet of space. Because the weather is still decent in California, they're also using the outdoor space when possible to be repurposed in some ways to support learning. And so all of these are questions that we have to answer in real time. Today we delivered the guidance. What we do now is we continue to work with school districts across the state on how it's implemented, where we ask our districts to analyze their campus through the lens of 6 feet, desks spaced out 6 feet. What does that mean? Does that mean that they can handle 10 students or 15 students? What's that number so that we can work with them if they are working through challenges around spacing? And so these are some of the things that we anticipate going forward. I'd like to give Dr. Gregson an opportunity to speak about some of the different classroom instruction models that we've heard districts say that they're interested in pursuing.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent Thurman. So one of the instructional schedule models that we have within our guidance, and we know that many districts are looking at this, is looking at having our kindergarten through third grade students have in-person instruction because of the reading instruction. It needs the phonological awareness and phonics and blending. Those components are best done within person. And then having the older grades, 4th through 6th grade, be more engaged in distance learning. Another instructional schedule model we talk about is where we have certain grade levels, maybe K2 coming on Monday, Tuesday to in-person instruction, then Wednesday, Thursday, 4th through 6th grade, Friday, everybody's engaged in distance learning and teachers are engaged in professional learning opportunities. It really depends on the context for the district and the needs of the community.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Jocelyn Gecker at the Associated Press. Is it reasonable to think that schools will be able to meet these considerations by the fall? Or do you anticipate that some schools may not see a return to campuses this fall? Superintendent Thurman.
Well, thanks for the question. We have not heard from any school district leader who has said that they cannot open because of the physical distancing requirements. And we believe that while these requirements would place some challenge on districts, that our districts are working hard to work through those challenges. And so first we have to try and we have to plan. And when we come across obstacles that cannot be worked around, then we have to come up with alternatives for that, how that will happen. But we also today, as I mentioned, we were able to share examples of a few schools that have opened in California that have found a way to make this work. And I'm pleased to report that those schools have found a way to do this with 6 feet of space, with students and staff wearing facial coverings. And as they reported themselves, they have not seen any cases of increased infection. Now, they're doing a lot of work around what I would call good prevention work to ensure that students' temperatures are taken before they enter the campus. They're asking parents to also take temperatures before a student leaves home. And if the student, in any way reflects being sick in any way, that they keep their student home that day. And so there are lots of questions, and we're all working together in real time to get the answers. The information that we have provided now here in June gives us time to work through many scenarios before most schools would even open in late August and others in September. We know that the biggest challenge that our students face and our schools face about their ability to open with these new physical distancing requirements in place are questions around funding. And so we acknowledge that in order to do these things, schools need to have lots of personal protective equipment. And that means revenue from the state to support it. And we acknowledge that there's a challenge right now, at least through the most recently proposed budget in the mid-year revise, that would have put cuts in place. But since then, the legislature has come back with its own version of the budget at the end of last week that stays those cuts, that restores those cuts, and that would give school districts the kind of funding that they need. And so what we need is to give our districts full funding. We've been asking and advocating and working with the governor and the legislature and the Department of Finances to figure out a way to hold districts harmless on ADA so that they have flexible and stable funding. We've been working with the governor and the Department of Finance and the legislature on notions of how the state can provide more money for personal protective equipment. And already on Friday, the governor has announced as a start, personal protective equipment for all of our schools. And so we're working on scenarios to expand that to make sure that our districts have what they need. And there's no scenario, I would say, more important than getting the support that is being discussed in Congress. We know that we need support from the federal level to cover a number of things, including money for meals for our students, because our school districts aren't being reimbursed at the rate and the level that they need. We have written directly to the Secretary of Agriculture at USDA. We've been on the phone with high-level deputies at the Department of Agriculture, and we've asked our speaker and our senators in California to reach out on how to free up some dollars for meal reimbursement that we think should be coming to California and to all of the states. And so we'll continue this advocacy. As I indicated, we have to continue to plan and prepare for the opening of school. As we are in June, it gives us some time to work through scenarios and to continue to adjust the guidance as we learn more information about what can be done. For now, we're asking districts to plan based on the most safe guidelines that we know of about how to reopen safely. Thanks. And next question, please.
Thank you. And we do have time for one more question. We had both from Jill Tucker at the San Francisco Chronicle and Mackenzie Mays at Politico questions that you just addressed related to the affordability for school districts to be able to implement these measures during a state budget crisis. Mackenzie from Politico also asks, what is the difference between CDE's guidance and the California Department of Public Health guidance released on Friday?
Thank you, Mackenzie and Jill. The CDE guidance is intended to work in tandem with the state's CDPH guidance, each speaking to different measures, but related and certainly connected. CDE's guidance speaks to educational programming, like what you heard from Dr. Gregson. We have been hearing from many districts that they intend to move students in cohorts, sometimes Monday, Wednesday, sometimes Tuesday, Thursday. We know that many districts are thinking about even possibly having a cohort that comes in the morning and then a cohort that comes in the afternoon. These are the kinds of things that our districts will have to explore to keep their class sizes small so that they can work within, physical distancing conditions. And so obviously the financial components are important. And so CDE's guidance speaks to educational programming, how staff and students are arranged to accommodate what's needed to provide physical distancing and safety. The CDPH guidance speaks to just that, more safety practices, the kinds of things that really come from the health officials about what to expect, about what things need to be in place. Speaks to the type of personal protective equipment. It speaks to some of the ingredients and materials that need to be used for sanitizing our campuses. And so, and again, our guidance is informed by CDPH and by Cal OSHA, but ultimately CDE's guidance has more to do with educational programming. And as you'll see, it spells out a great deal around how to support students with disabilities, how to support students who come from families that are English learner families, how we address the social emotional needs of our students. That's the lane that CDE is most focused on. we invite you to stay tuned with us as we continue to share updates about groups that we've convened around providing social and emotional support to our students. We think that's critical. And so that is how the two different guidances are intended to work, but to work in tandem, all towards promoting the safety of our students. We thank you for being a part of this conversation. The things that you report are so important to Californians, that they hear that we're placing safety first, ahead of everything, that there's nothing more important right now than promoting the safety of our students and our staff and their families, and addressing the social emotional needs of our students. We recognize that COVID-19 has had a devastating effect on everything that we know about providing education. It forces us to enter into a new conversation about the way educational programming looks and will look going forward. We want people to recognize that, seat time is going to look different, instruction is going to look different, but the California Department of Education, led by Dr. Gregson and others, is having conversations with educators about how we promote more consistency across each of our classrooms, across each of our districts, so that at the end of the day, even if it looks a little different, students are getting quality education, that educators are getting professional development that is so important to making sure that there's quality in distance learning, that there's quality instruction, and that if there are new schedules for how students are arranged, we continue to ensure that our students receive a high quality education. It's going to take us some time to get all those questions answered around how we measure learning. That's going to look differently. On how we close the digital divide. That is a huge challenge that we are working around the clock. We are pushing harder than ever to say that California students need to have a computing device at home and need to have access to the internet. Some of those needs are going to require legislative strategies and funding. And so please, I hope that our partners in the media will broadcast and report how important it is that California and all 50 of our states get support from the federal government so that we can close our technology gaps for our students who are in distance learning and for our students who are in class instruction. They too need to have working Wi-Fi that they can count on to get this done. And so that's it for now. Stay tuned for more updates. Know that we're meeting with every sector throughout this week and beyond to talk about how to adjust the guidance. And we will continue to update it as we get new information from physicians and scientists, because safety is paramount. And we are working hard to ensure we can safely reopen our schools. Thank you very much. Continue to be safe and to be well.